What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. The college football playoff rankings were announced last night. I know that some of the rankings on my screen are a little bit covered up by my beautiful face, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over some of the rankings and my initial thoughts, as well as go over some of the more playoff scenario type situations where we're going to go over each conference that's in the running and who actually has a tangible chance of making the playoffs. So my initial thoughts is that I am very excited to see that the playoff rankings are putting Georgia at number 2 and Michigan at number 3 because their schedule has not been tested, has not been proven to be very good, especially Michigan. Michigan has played 0 ranked teams. Ohio State has a good track record. They beat Notre Dame. They beat Penn State. And Penn State has some good wins under their belt. They've played Iowa, who was ranked at the time. But Michigan has played 0 ranked teams. Georgia, I think, has played 1 ranked team. I'm surprised Florida is not ahead of Michigan because Florida State has multiple ranked wins under their belt. They beat LSU, who is number 14. They've beaten Duke, who's no longer on the AP poll. I guess if you were to look at it, the AP poll is not really relevant, especially since most of those ACC teams are no longer on the list because they just keep beating themselves. Florida State does not play Louisville, so that's going to be very interesting. Another interesting thing is that the group of 5 teams are at the back. So Air Force is number 25, Tulane's number 24. It seems like the AP poll gives the group of 5 teams a little bit more love than the college football playoff rankings. I think even though the Air Force is at the back, I still feel like some of the way the college football players ranks some of the group of 5 teams is a little bit unfair. Like, playing football is hard. I get that some of these teams aren't as good, but like you still could give the respect for an 8-0 team because winning games is hard. And winning 8 in a row is still a challenge. And then Tulane, they were close neck and neck with Ole Miss, who is number 10 on the list. So like Tulane is not a bad team, but to each their own. Kansas State and Oklahoma State are now on this list, which is really cool. I'm surprised that no other ACC teams on here that's X2, but I understand because North Carolina has lost 2 in a row. Kansas State's on a roll. They're dominating teams, etc., etc. One notable example before we move on to the conferences, Notre Dame is X2. They're going to be 15. They're probably guaranteed a New Year's Six Bowl, but if they lose another game, they're definitely not. They have 0 chance of making the playoffs, especially with this strong of a year. Like, we could argue a couple years ago that there could be an X2 put in the playoffs just because so many teams were losing. But this year, we can't even make the argument that an X2 could make the playoffs unless something crazy were to happen because all the X1s go from 6 to 13. And so all of these teams will have to, like, lose to someone terrible for those numbers to even drop. And some of them do play each other, so there is a chance of that. But then some won't play each other until either the end of the season or the conference championship. So there's practically 0 chance that the next 2 team will make the playoffs unless a miracle happens. First, we're going to go over the ACC. We're going to do this in ABC order just by conference. So I could have just put like the block a picture with all the ACC teams and just put that up there for you guys to see. But I like cool graphics like this where you just see the 2 primary teams. We don't need to see all the other fluff of the conference. Those rest of those teams have 0 chance. There's a bunch of X2s in the ACC. Virginia Tech, only 1 loss in the conference, but Virginia Tech isn't very good, and I think they're going to lose to Louisville this weekend. Louisville's 13, Florida State's 4, and they don't play each other this year, which is awesome because that makes it so much better for when they do play each other in the ACC championship game to see who has a better chance. I think there is a chance that maybe 1, more or less not 2 X1s, but unless most of these undefeateds were to lose, then there could be 2 X1s in the playoffs. But more likely, it's just going to be 1. And Louisville has a strong chance. If they both were to win out, Louisville have a strong argument if they were to beat Florida State. But Florida State pretty much has an easy path to the ACC championship game. They don't have anyone else that they're playing that's like relatively good, unless they drop like they did against Boston College. I don't see Florida State losing a single game. They have like a 57% win out rate, Louisville does not, which is crazy because their schedule isn't very hard either. I don't think they play any more ranked teams. I think they play Miami at the end of the year, but Miami is a little iffy this year. They're hit and miss. So I would be great to see the ACC, these two teams to win out, just so we can get a really competitive ACC championship game. I would hate to see like a Virginia Tech or some random ACC school against Florida State because there'd just be a blowout. It just wouldn't be very competitive. Wouldn't be very fun. Big 12, there's only two teams that really matter. There's a bunch of X2s like Oklahoma State. There's Kansas State that also are in discussion. Kansas, but the three teams are X2. And like I said at the beginning of the video, there's like zero chance that an X2 is going to make it. This is a very competitive, very strong showing from the NCAA, which is going to be great to see if this kind of like stays like this into next year where there's a top 12 teams. But like all the conference realignment, it could be very different. But anyway, Texas is X1. Their only loss is to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is X1. Their loss is to Kansas, which is unfortunate because Oklahoma could have been undefeated, and we could have a very different kind of conversation of X1s. This is why I said there's probably could be two, because any undefeated could lose at any point, and then the conference champion could be X1, and they will have a strong argument to get into the playoffs unless there's a lot of undefeateds. Currently, there's 5. 2 of them are in the same conference, so there could be a chance. I think if Oklahoma stays well, they could win out and face Texas, because I think Texas is going to win out. I don't think they're going to lose anybody because Texas is playing very strong football. I know that's pretty close football, but it's pretty strong. Versus Oklahoma, which has been playing really weak football. They lost that game to Kansas. They were on a close one the week before. They play OSU this weekend, which in my prediction video, if you want to check that out, it's up in the corner. They could lose to Oklahoma State, which then will pretty much take them out entirely of the running, even if they were to win the Big 12 championship, just because they are X2. The Big 12, I think, is probably the weaker of the 5 conferences, just because of their schedule strength. These are the 2 best teams in the conference, and the rest of the teams are significantly worse in comparison to FBI and all that stuff. Down in the Big 10, we have Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. This is a very interesting scenario. I thought about it in my head. So if Penn State were to beat Michigan, and then Michigan were to beat Ohio State, then there would be 3 X1s tied for the Big 10 East. There will be 3 X1s tied for the Big 10 East, and it'll be very interesting to see who gets to go to the Big 10 championship. And then that would be a situation where there would be an X1 Big 10 champion, because they're more likely going to play Iowa. If Iowa were to win out, then they would play Iowa, because Minnesota is the next best team next to Wisconsin. But Iowa's already beat Wisconsin. They lost to Minnesota, but Minnesota also plays Ohio State this year, and Ohio State's not losing to Minnesota. So it would more likely be Iowa, and then it would be kind of similar to the previous year where they just get blown out because Iowa doesn't have any offense. So it would be 3 X1s tied to go, and it'll be very interesting to see who they decide. But more likely, Penn State is going to lose both to Ohio State and Michigan. And even if Penn State were to beat Michigan, I don't see Penn State beating Michigan. Like Michigan could lose to Ohio State, and then it would be unfortunate because then Ohio State just goes to the Big Ten championship with no problem. But I would love to see those 2 undefeated by the end of the year, just because that makes it a very competitive game. It's always exciting to see Michigan and Ohio State at the end of the year undefeated. Sorry, Nittany Lions. I was a Nittany Lion believer, but then they lost, and then now it's like, do I really want them in? Like, I guess like if they were to win out, and then I can't think of a scenario that wouldn't cause like massive uproar from either party. Pac 12, there used to be a lot of teams on this list, and then all their teams lost. So there's there's like half the conferences ranked or something like that. But most of their rankings are not in the top 10. They're in like the top 15 to 20. So, and they're a bunch of X2s. So there's like no chance for them. Oregon is X1, and I would argue that they would play better football in that game against Washington than Washington themselves, because after their amazing win against Oregon, they started playing terribly. Like Washington, they can't run the ball. Their defense has been struggling. They go toe-to-toe with ASU. Like, they didn't even score 20 points on ASU, and ASU is pretty much a high school team out there. So I could see these 2 teams winning out, or Washington losing a close one, because these 2 teams do play all those X2 teams at the bottom. especially Washington. I think they play USC. I think they play Oregon State. They play a bunch of teams that are ranked. So it'll be interesting to see what Washington does. I can easily see Washington losing one of those games, and then it'll be 2x1 Pac-12 teams in the championship because I think Oregon's going to win out. And then it'll be another situation where it'll be like the Big 12. If they were to win out, it would be 2x1s, 2x1s, and they'll have a chance. And then if ACC were to win and Louisville to win, then it'll be 3x1s, and then there'll be another huge debate on who gets in. And then this is where it gets really complicated. It's the SEC, and no one wants to see two SEC teams in the playoffs, especially when there's a lot of good football from the other conferences. The next one, there'll be like this huge debate on like conference strength, power strength, and a bunch of stuff. And at this point, SEC has the strongest like showing of X1s versus like the Pac-12 is an overall stronger conference just because it has more ranked teams than the SEC, but SEC has more X1 teams, which X1s like these three, there's 3 X1s and Georgia. So let's go down the list. Georgia's undefeated. I think they could easily lose to any one of their next opponents. They have a bunch of ranked teams that they're going to be playing, like Missouri. I could see Missouri trying to upset that game. I think they play Tennessee. Tennessee's pretty good. And then, Ole Miss has only losses to Alabama. And I think Ole Miss can steal a win here. Could try to win out their best of their abilities. But I do think Ole Miss is probably going to end the season like X2, maybe X3, more likely X2. Missouri is X1. They're only lost to LSU, and LSU has a very strong showing. They're X2, but they're a very powerful team. Their FBI rankings are very high. It's a very good loss for Missouri as long as LSU keeps winning. Alabama's only loss is to Texas, and Texas is 8. So all of these teams have really good losses because Ole Miss is to Alabama, which is right there next to them. So it's not like they lost to some crappy team like Oklahoma losing to Kansas. It would just be really hard to argue to get in the playoffs if you have like really bad losses. These guys have really good losses. I think Missouri has a chance. Missouri and in this situation, it's very interesting because for the SEC, Missouri and Georgia on one side, Alabama and Ole Miss on the other side, and they're really battling for that spot in the SEC championship game. And when I mentioned earlier with the X1s, it's very complicated because, like, let's say Alabama were to win out, Georgia would win out, Alabama or Ole Miss, either or were to win out, they'll be X1, and Georgia would win out, they'll be XO. Say Alabama or Ole Miss were to beat Georgia, then it would be 2 X1s, and there'll be an X1 champion, an X1 underdog, and then there'll be a situation where then you look at the other programs, they could be X1, and then you have to argue that can the SEC have two people in there, or say the Pac-12, for example, if Washington were to win out, and then Georgia and Oregon were to win out, and Washington were to lose to Oregon in a really tight one in like overtime, then you could argue that there's 2 Pac-12 teams. This is why the 12-team playoff should have been implemented this year, not next year, because now everyone is sitting around just going, we want 12-team playoff and not whatever we're getting right now, because now it's just going to be very complicated, especially right now. Pac-12 is no more next year, so it's going to be Power 4 with a group of 5 teams. There's not going to be a huge competition for power struggles. There's going to be a bunch of teams in the playoffs, and it would be really cool to see this year's teams battle it out in a playoff scenario. Maybe they could just expedite the situation and just say we're going to have a 12-team playoff this year instead of a team 4, but that's very unlikely, especially with TV contracts and everything that's going on right now and everything that needs to happen. So one could only hope. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you really liked. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like content like this. I will continue to make the format like this because I don't really like just clipping images from ESPN or CBS into the screen and just talk over it. I do like making these documents. I do like making these graphics, and I can edit the graphics. I can make better graphics. Just let me know in the comments on what you think. Peace.